Welcome back to the deep dive. I gotta say, I always get really pumped for dives like today's.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because we're gonna explore something, you use every single day, writing.
Right.
But we're gonna be looking at it through the lens of Roland Barthes.
Okay.
And don't worry if that name doesn't ring a bell, we're gonna guide you through it. We've got excerpts from a couple of his works, Writing Degree Zero and Elements of Semiology.
Mm.
Those titles, they sound kind of intimidating, I know.
Yeah, a little bit.
But trust me, these writings are full of super fascinating insights about how writing is so much more than just putting words on paper.
Okay, yeah.
Get ready to uncover how, like, history and society and even our own bodies influence how we write. We'll be tackling some pretty thought-provoking questions like what really makes writing different from just speaking? Can a writer ever truly break free from all those rules and expectations of their time?
Right.
And what in the world is zero-degree writing anyway?
It's easy to think, writing is pretty straightforward. But Barthes kind of digs a little deeper. With this concept he calls a creature.
A creature.
And it goes like way beyond just handwriting. Think of it as the entire system of choices a writer makes. Their own unique fingerprint they leave on the page, revealing their relationship with language itself.
Oh, that's a great point. It's like when you're writing an email to a friend, you probably use like different words and phrases than when you're writing, say, a formal letter to a potential employer or something like that. So literature is like the sum total of all those choices, right?
Exactly. And what makes this so interesting is that it challenges that simple idea of style as personal choice.
Yeah.
Think about it. Language itself is a shared system, like a set of building blocks we all have access to.
Right.
It's like the air we breathe. It surrounds us. It shapes how we think, and it even limits what we can express. But then within those limitations, we each develop our own style, our own way of using those building blocks.
So it's like we're all playing with the same Lego set, but we each build something totally unique.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Uh-huh.
But Barthes, he takes it even a step further. He suggests that style might be influenced by factors beyond our conscious control.
Oh, wow.
Almost like a biological fingerprint. He describes it as a transmutation of a humor, which implies that like our personality, our very essence, is somehow imprinted on our writing.
Now, that is a pretty radical idea. It means that even when we think we're making conscious choices about our writing, there might be, like, deeper forces at play shaping our style in ways we're not even aware of.
Right?
It kind of makes you wonder, can a writer ever truly be free?
That's a question Barthes grapples with throughout his work. And one of the ways he explores it is by looking at the power of the preterite tense. That past tense we often use in like novels and historical accounts.
Oh, absolutely. Like the king declared war or the hero rode off into the sunset. It's that classic storytelling tense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Barthes argues that the preterite creates a sense of order and inevitability.
Yeah.
Even if the events, weren't actually that neat and tidy in real life.
Right.
Think about how history is often presented as, like, a series of events that just led inexorably to the present. The preterite tense helps create that illusion of a clear and straightforward narrative.
Yeah, it's like the preterite smooths out all the rough edges of reality, making everything seem more organized and predictable than it probably was.
Right.
And it's not just history books. Think about how news reports use the preterite to create a sense of authority and objectivity. It's like they're saying, this is what happened, period.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And this connects to Barthes' idea of writing as a kind of pact between the writer and society.
Okay.
Both agree to create this illusion of order and control over reality. And the preterite tense is like a key tool in that process. It's like we're all playing along with this unspoken agreement to present the past in a particular way.
So we're all kind of complicit in creating this sanitized version of history. But this pact doesn't last forever, right? Things start to shift in the mid-19th century, don't they?
You're absolutely right. Around 1850, we see this fascinating disintegration of what Barthes calls bourgeois writing.
Now, hold on a second. What exactly does he mean by bourgeois writing? That sounds awfully academic.
Good point.
Yeah.
Let me clarify. For Barthes, bourgeois writing represents a style that reinforces the values and power structures of, the dominant class. Think of it like this. For centuries, writing was primarily controlled by the elite. They set the standards for what was considered good writing.
Right.
And those standards often reflected their worldview and their interests.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connection. So the shift away from bourgeois writing means that writers are starting to question those established rules and expectations.
Exactly. And a pivotal figure in this shift is Gustave Flaubert,
Flaubert.
the novelist who was absolutely obsessed with finding the perfect word,
Hmm.
the perfect sentence.
Oh, yeah, Flaubert. He was notorious for spending hours agonizing over every single detail of his writing.
Precisely. And his, painstaking craftsmanship reflects a new awareness of writing itself, its limitations, and its potential for subversion.
Hmm.
It's no longer simply about conveying information in a clear and straightforward way. It's about grappling with the very nature of language and using it to challenge the status quo.
So Flaubert is like the rebel who starts to break the mold, paving the way for other writers to experiment with different styles and voices.
That's a great way to put it. And this awareness that Flaubert, embodies gives rise to what Barthes calls modes of writing, each reflecting the writer's stance on their social position and their relationship to the dominant culture.
So we have Flaubert with his meticulous style, just meticulously crafting every sentence. And then you have other writers who are reacting to this shift in different ways.
Exactly. For example, you have the calculated realism of writers like Émile Zola and Guy de Maupassant.
Okay.
They were trying to capture the grit and grime of everyday life, often focusing on the struggles of the working class. It was a deliberate departure from the romanticized portrayals of society that were common in earlier literature.
So they were using writing as a tool for social commentary, almost like journalists, exposing the harsh realities that the elite often ignored.
Precisely. And then you have, politically charged writing, particularly from communist authors
Okay.
who are actively challenging the existing social order. Barthes even quotes a line about berets buffeted in the wind, highlighting how their writing is infused with the imagery and language of revolution.
It's like they're using words as weapons, fighting for a new world order. But isn't there a bit of irony there? I mean, even these communist writers, they're
Yeah.
still using the same basic tools of language, the same grammar and syntax that were developed within the very system they're trying to dismantle.
That's a brilliant observation. It highlights this inherent tension that Barthes is getting at.
Yeah.
Even when writers are trying to break free from the conventions of their time, they're still operating within a system that's deeply ingrained in the culture. It's almost as if they're caught in this gravitational pull of
Ooh.
existing literary forms.
Feels like they're trying to escape the Matrix, but the Matrix is still all around them.
That's a fantastic way to put it.
Mhm.
And this struggle for freedom,
Yeah.
this desire to break free from the constraints of language and convention, leads us to one of Barthes' most radical concepts,
Mhm.
zero-degree writing.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. 0-degree writing. It sounds almost mystical, like a quest for pure, unadulterated expression. What exactly is Barthes getting at here?
Imagine a style of writing that's stripped bare, free from any trace of the author's personality or the weight of history.
Hmm.
It's like a blank slate,
Yeah.
a neutral zone where language can exist in its purest form.
It sounds almost impossible, like trying to erase your own shadow. But I can see how it would be incredibly appealing to writers who are struggling to break free from those ingrained conventions we were talking about. They're like, let me just start from scratch with a clean slate.
Exactly.
Oh.
And to understand zero-degree writing, it might help to think about it in terms of linguistics. You know how verbs can have different moods?
Yeah.
Like the indicative, the subjunctive, and the imperative?
Oh yeah, like I am going versus if I were going versus go. Each one has a different vibe, a different level of certainty or urgency.
Precisely. Well, think of zero-degree writing as the indicative mood of writing.
Okay.
It's the most neutral, the most objective,
Yeah.
the least emotionally charged. It's like presenting information in its rawest form without any embellishment or interpretation.
So it's like the difference between saying the sky is blue versus, the sky blazed with a brilliant azure hue, evoking a sense of boundless possibility.
Yeah.
One is just stating a fact, while the other is layering on all sorts of subjective interpretations.
That's a perfect example. And some of the writers who embodied this zero-degree approach include Albert Camus, Maurice Blanchot, and Raymond Queneau.
Okay.
Their writing strives for a clarity and directness that feels almost stripped bare
Mm.
of traditional literary flourishes.
Yeah.
It's an attempt to mirror the immediacy of natural speech,
Yeah.
as if they're trying to erase the distance between thought and language.
Is that even possible? I mean, isn't writing inherently different from speech? When we write, we have time to plan and edit to polish our words.
Right.
But speech is more spontaneous, more in the moment. Can writing ever truly capture that essence of spoken language?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's one that Barthes explores in depth. He examines writers like Jean-Paul Sartre, who tried to capture the spontaneity of speech in his novels
Okay.
by using the stream of consciousness techniques and unconventional dialogue.
Right.
But ultimately, Barthes argues that even these attempts are still artifice.
So even when we're trying to be natural, to write as we speak, we're still making choices, shaping the language to fit our intentions. It's like we can never fully escape the fact that writing is a constructed act, a deliberate process of choosing and arranging words.
You've hit the nail on the head. Even the most seemingly natural writing is still the product of conscious decisions. And this brings us to a rather bleak
Okay.
but fascinating point that Barthes makes. He suggests that a modern masterpiece is essentially impossible.
Wait, a modern masterpiece is impossible. Why would he say that?
Well, he believes that writers are caught between a rock and a hard place.
Okay.
On one hand, you have these traditional literary forms that feel increasingly out of touch with modern life,
Right.
with its rapid pace and constant change.
It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah,
Those old forms just don't seem equipped to capture the complexities of the modern world.
exactly. And on the other hand, you have this struggle to create new forms that can adequately express our modern experiences.
Right.
But those new forms are constantly evolving, never quite solidifying into something definitive.
It's like we're building the ship while we're sailing it, constantly adapting to the changing tides.
That's a great way to put it. And for Barthes, this is the defining predicament
Hmm.
of the modern writer.
Yeah.
They're stuck between these outdated forms and a world that's in constant flux. But it's not just about writers.
Mm.
Barthes's insights, they apply to any system of science, not just language.
Hold on. Are we about to go down the rabbit hole of semiotics? Because that sounds intriguing, but I want to make sure I'm following along.
Sure.
How does this all connect back to writing?
Remember that concept of écriture we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Well, Barthes sees writing as a kind of model for understanding how any system of meaning works, not just language.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So you're saying that there's a kind of language to other things like fashion or food or architecture?
Absolutely. Think about it.
Uh-huh.
Fashion. It isn't just about wearing clothes. It's about communicating something about yourself, your identity, your social status.
Right.
Like a mini skirt paired with combat boots. That might signify rebellion,
Mm.
while a tailored suit might convey authority and professionalism.
Yeah.
These are all choices, just like the choices a writer makes when they select certain words or phrases.
So you're saying that there's like a grammar to fashion,
Mm.
a set of rules about how different elements are combined to create meaning. That's
Yeah.
fascinating. And it's not just fashion, right? You mentioned food and architecture as well.
Exactly. Think about how a fancy multi-course meal is presented in a high-end restaurant
Okay, yeah.
versus a simple home-cooked meal.
Right.
The arrangement of the food, the type of plates and cutlery, the atmosphere of the dining room, they all contribute to a certain meaning, a
Mhm.
certain experience.
Yeah, it's like there's a whole unspoken language being spoken through those choices, conveying messages about luxury or intimacy or tradition.
Precisely. And architecture is another great example.
Okay.
Think about the difference between a soaring cathedral
Yeah,
and a sleek modern skyscraper.
right.
They're both buildings, but they convey vastly different meanings about power, spirituality, and our relationship to the world around us. Barthes would say that these differences aren't accidental. They're part of a deliberate system of signs
Mm.
that we've created to communicate with each other.
So we're surrounded by all these hidden languages, these systems of meaning that we often take for granted.
Right.
But once you start to see them, it's like a whole new world opens up.
Exactly. And Barthes provides us with the tools to decode those languages, to understand how meaning is created and how it shapes our perception of the world.
Okay, I'm ready to delve deeper into this world of semiotics. Where do we start?
Well, to understand Barthes' approach to semiology, we need to go back to the basics of linguistics. Barthes draws heavily on the work of Ferdinand de Saussure, a Swiss linguist who revolutionized the way we think about language.
I've heard of Saussure, but my linguistics knowledge is a bit rusty.
Huh?
Can you give me a quick refresher?
Of course. One of Saussure's key contributions was the distinction between langue and parole.
Mm-hmm.
Langue refers to the underlying system of a language. The rules and conventions that we all agree on, basically the grammar and vocabulary.
Right.
Parole, on the other hand, is the actual act of speaking or writing, the individual utterances that we produce.
So lang is like the blueprint, the set of instructions,
Right.
while parole is the actual building that's constructed using that blueprint.
That's a fantastic analogy.
Mm.
And just like a blueprint, Lang constrains what's possible in parole.
Mm.
We can't just make up random sounds and expect to be understood.
Right.
You have to follow the rules of the language.
And this applies to other systems of signs too, right? Like, I can't just wear a swimsuit to a job interview and expect to be taken seriously. There are unspoken rules about what's appropriate in different contexts.
Exactly. Yeah. And Barthes would argue that those unspoken rules are part of the Lang of fashion.
Okay.
Just like language has grammar rules, fashion has its own set of conventions about what's acceptable or stylish or meaningful in different situations.
So we have this underlying system of signs, the lang, and the individual acts of communication, the parole. But how do we actually make sense of these signs? How do we know what they mean?
That's where the concept of signification comes in.
Mm.
For Barthes, a sign is made up of two parts, the signifier and the signified. The signifier is the physical form of the sign. It could be a word, an image, a gesture, a sound, anything that could be perceived by our senses.
Mm.
The signified is the concept or meaning that the signifier represents.
Okay, let me see if I've got this straight. The word tree is a signifier, the actual sound we make when we say the word.
Right.
And the concept of tree, like the mental image that pops into our heads when we hear that word, is the signified.
You got it. And it's this relationship between the signifier and the signified that creates meaning. We don't just perceive the world as like a random jumble of sensory data. We organize it into meaningful units
Right.
through this process of signification.
But isn't that relationship pretty arbitrary? I mean, there's no inherent reason why the sound tree should represent the concept of a tree. It could just as easily be any other sound.
That's a brilliant point, and you're echoing Saussure here.
Mm-hmm.
He argued that the relationship between the signifier and the signified is largely arbitrary.
Hmm.
There's no natural or logical connection between them.
Okay.
It's a matter of convention, of agreement within a particular culture.
Which explains why different languages have different words for the same thing. Tree in English is arbre, in French, arbol, in Spanish, and so on. So if this relationship is arbitrary, how do we ever learn what signs mean?
We learn through experience,
Mm-hmm.
through exposure to language and other systems of signs. As children, we're constantly bombarded with signs, words, images, sounds, gestures. And we gradually learn to associate certain signifiers with certain signifieds. But here's the key takeaway. The meaning of a sign, it isn't inherent in the sign itself.
Okay.
It's determined by its relationship to other signs within the system.
Okay, so it's all about context and relationships. Like the meaning of the word tree is determined by its difference from other words in the English language.
Yeah.
Like bush or flower or plant.
Exactly. It's all about difference in relationships. And this idea is fundamental to Barthes' approach to semiology.
Mm.
He argues that we understand signs, not in isolation,
Right.
but in relation to each other,
Okay.
within a network of meanings.
So it's not just about decoding individual signs, it's about understanding the whole system, the whole web of meanings that they create.
Precisely. And this is where things get really fascinating. Because once you start thinking about language and other systems of signs this way, you realize just how much our perception of the world is shaped by these systems.
It's like we're not just passively observing reality. We're actively constructing it through the language and signs that we use.
Right.
We're creating our own little mental maps of the world based on the signs we've learned to interpret.
That's a great way to put it. And this insight is incredibly powerful because it allows us to question the assumptions that underlie our understanding of the world. It allows us to see how these systems can be used to reinforce existing power structures,
Right.
to shape our beliefs and values, or to challenge those structures and create new ways of seeing and understanding.
So Barthes' ideas aren't just about language and literature, they're about understanding how meaning is created and how it shapes our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. It's like he's giving us a new lens through which to view reality, a way to see beyond the surface and uncover the hidden mechanisms at play.
Exactly. And that's why his work is so relevant, even today. It gives us the tools to, critically analyze the messages that we're bombarded with every day, whether it's in advertising, politics, or even our personal relationships.
So Barthes is giving us a way to see through the matrix, to understand how the code works. He's encouraging us to become more aware of the signs and symbols that shape our reality and to question the meanings that they convey. And it all starts with understanding how writing itself, this seemingly simple act of putting words on paper is actually a complex and powerful system of meaning making.
That's a brilliant way to sum it up. And now that we've laid the groundwork, we can start to delve deeper into Barthes' exploration of writing, particularly his concept of zero-degree writing,
Right.
which challenges us to rethink the very possibilities of language and expression.
I'm ready.
Let's dive in. To picking up where we left off, you asked if writing could ever truly capture that essence of spoken language.
Right.
It's a question that has fascinated writers and thinkers for centuries.
Yeah.
And Barthes, being Barthes, he doesn't offer a simple answer.
Well, that's what keeps us coming back for more, right? Easy answers are boring.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is that even in striving for this zero degree, this pure neutrality, writers are still making choices.
Okay.
They're choosing to strip away certain elements to prioritize certain values, even if those values are, clarity, simplicity, a sense of objectivity.
So even zero-degree writing isn't truly neutral. It's still shaped by the writer's perspective, their intentions.
Mhm.
It's like trying to be completely invisible, but like forgetting you're wearing a brightly colored hat or something.
That's a great way to put it. It's like trying to create a perfectly blank canvas. You know,
Yeah.
the very act of choosing a canvas, of preparing it, of framing it, already introduces certain biases, certain decisions that shape how we perceive that final product.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see the paradox here. So even when writers are trying to be objective, to like disappear behind their words, their presence is still felt.
Precisely. And this raises an important question for all of us, not just writers. If even zero-degree writing is an illusion, what does that mean for any attempt to write, authentically?
Whoa, that's a deep question. It's like we're always caught in this web of language and meaning, always trying to express ourselves, but never quite able to fully escape the constraints of the system.
It is a bit of a paradox, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
This constant struggle, this awareness of the limitations of language is what pushes us to be more creative, more thoughtful, more deliberate in our communication.
You know, that makes me think about all the different ways we use language to connect with each other, to share our experiences, to persuade, to entertain. Even something as simple as a text message is loaded with meaning, you know?
Exactly. Think about the emojis you choose,
Right.
the abbreviations you use, the tone you convey. All of these choices, they contribute to the meaning of your message. And
Hmm.
it's happening on a subconscious level most of the time.
So it's not just about the words themselves, it's about all those subtle cues and signals that we use to communicate with each other.
Precisely. And that's what makes language so fascinating and complex. It's this ever-evolving system that we're constantly shaping and being shaped by.
And if a modern masterpiece is impossible, as Barthes suggests, then what's the point of writing at all? Are we all just doomed to fail?
Barthes doesn't necessarily see it as a matter of failure or success.
Okay.
He's more interested in the possibilities that emerge from this predicament.
Hmm.
If writers are aware of the limitations of language, if they're willing to experiment with new forms,
Yeah.
to push the boundaries of what's considered acceptable or correct, then they can create works that are both challenging and insightful.
So it's about embracing the struggle, about playing with the rules, about finding, new and creative ways to express ourselves within the constraints of language.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting.
Uh-huh.
Because it's in this space of experimentation, of pushing against those conventions,
Right.
that truly innovative and thought-provoking writing can emerge. Think about writers who break grammatical rules, who invent new words, who blend genres in unexpected ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not just trying to, communicate a message. They're trying to expand the possibilities of language itself.
It's funny because in a way that kind of reminds me of the scientific process.
Mm,
Scientists are always questioning existing theories, testing boundaries, looking for new ways to understand the world.
right.
And sometimes those breakthroughs come from challenging the assumptions that everyone else just takes for granted.
That's a brilliant connection. And it highlights the importance of critical thinking, not just in science, but in all aspects of life,
Hmm.
including writing. When
Yeah.
we question assumptions, when we challenge conventions,
Right.
we open ourselves up to new possibilities, new ways of seeing and understanding the world. And
Yeah.
that's where true innovation lies.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the challenges of writing and the limitations of language. But I'm curious, what about the joys of writing? What about the sheer pleasure of crafting a sentence, of finding the perfect word, of creating something beautiful and meaningful with language.
Those joys are absolutely essential.
Yeah.
And Barthes, he wouldn't deny that.
Right?
In fact, he celebrates the power of language to move us, to inspire us, to connect us with each other. Remember, he was a literary critic, someone who deeply loved literature and who spent his life exploring its nuances and complexities.
So it's not about rejecting those pleasures, but rather about recognizing the complexities and contradictions that are inherent in the act of writing.
Precisely. It's about understanding that writing is both a personal and a social act,
Hmm.
that it's both liberating and constraining,
Yeah.
that it's both a product of our individual choices and a reflection of the culture we live in.
It's like a dance between freedom and constraint, between the individual and the collective.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it's in that tension, in that delicate balance,
Right.
that the magic of writing truly happens.
So even though Barthes suggests that a modern masterpiece is impossible, he's not saying that we should just like give up on writing altogether. He's actually encouraging us to embrace the challenges, to experiment with new forms, to push the boundaries of language, and to find joy in the process.
Exactly. He's reminding us that writing it's a journey, not a destination.
Hmm.
It's about constantly exploring, questioning, and pushing ourselves to create something meaningful and engaging.
And that's what makes writing so endlessly fascinating. It's a process of discovery, both for the writer and the reader.
Wow, it feels like we've covered so much ground.
Yeah, we have.
But it all like circles back to this idea that even when we're striving for simplicity or objectivity in our writing, there's always this subjective element involved. It's kind of mind-boggling.
It really is. And that's one of the things I find so brilliant about Barthes.
He forces us to confront these fundamental questions about language, meaning, and the very nature of communication.
Yeah. He's like that friend who always asks those tough questions, the
Oh.
ones that make you really think. And even though there might not be any easy answers, the process of grappling with those questions, it's what makes the conversation so enriching.
Absolutely. And I think that's a key takeaway for anyone who wants to improve their writing or their communication skills in general.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about like learning the rules of grammar or mastering different rhetorical techniques. It's about developing a critical awareness of how language works, how it shapes our perceptions, and how it can be used to both reinforce and challenge the status quo.
So it's not just about what we say, but how we say it and why we say it.
Exactly. And that why is so crucial because it gets to the heart of our intentions as communicators. You know, are we trying to inform, persuade, entertain, inspire, provoke? And how do those intentions shape our choices about language, tone, and style?
This makes me think about how differently we communicate in different contexts. Like you mentioned earlier, how we adjust our language when we're writing to a friend versus, a potential employer.
Right.
But it goes even deeper than that. Think about how we talk to our parents, our siblings, our partners. We have these shared histories, these unspoken understandings that influence how we communicate with each other.
That's a great point, and it highlights how language is always embedded in a social context.
Yeah.
We're never just communicating in a vacuum.
Right.
We're always negotiating relationships, power dynamics, cultural norms, personal histories, and those factors they inevitably shape our choices about language.
So it's like we're all playing this elaborate game of language with different rules and strategies depending on who we're talking to and what we're trying to achieve.
That's a fantastic analogy.
Uh-huh.
And I think Barthes would appreciate that playful aspect of language.
Yeah.
Even though he's often seen as a very serious intellectual figure,
Right.
there's a sense of playfulness in his writing, a willingness to experiment with language and to challenge our assumptions
Yeah.
about how it works.
It's like he's inviting us to join him in this grand adventure of exploring the possibilities of language.
Yeah.
Even if there's no final destination, no ultimate truth to be discovered.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so exciting. The journey itself is the reward.
Yeah.
And along the way, we might just stumble upon some profound insights about ourselves, our culture, and the power of language to shape our world.
So where does this leave us? If even 0-degree writing is an illusion, if there's no such thing as like pure objective language, then what's the point of striving for clarity and authenticity in our writing?
That's the question, isn't it? And I think Barthes would say that the point isn't to achieve some unattainable ideal of perfection. but rather to be aware of the forces that shape our language, to make conscious choices about how we use it,
Mm.
and to always be open to new possibilities.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that language is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill.
So it's about using language responsibly, ethically,
Right.
and with a critical awareness of its power to influence, persuade, and shape perceptions.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge that we all face,
Yeah.
whether we're, writers, speakers, or simply engaged citizens in a world saturated with language and communication.
You've given us so much to think about today, but before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something you said earlier about Barthes' work being relevant even
Right.
today.
Sure.
Can you give us a few concrete examples of how his ideas can be applied to our everyday lives?
Absolutely. Think about the way uh, advertising uses language and imagery
Okay.
to create desire, to
Yeah.
associate products with certain lifestyles or
Wow.
values. Or this concept of myth, it's incredibly helpful in understanding how these messages work on a subconscious level.
So by understanding how these myths are constructed,
Right.
we can become more critical consumers, more aware of the subtle ways that advertising tries to manipulate our emotions and desires.
Exactly. Another example is the way language is used in political discourse.
Mm.
Think about how politicians use like slogans, sound bites,
Right.
and carefully crafted rhetoric to persuade voters, to demonize opponents, or to frame complex issues in simplistic terms.
Yeah.
Barthes' work helps us to see through those rhetorical strategies, to understand the underlying power dynamics at play,
Hmm.
and to make more informed decisions about the information we consume.
It's like it's giving us a toolkit for
Mhm.
critical thinking, a way to analyze the language we encounter in the world and to make more informed choices about how we respond to it.
That's a great way to put it. And I think that's one of the most valuable legacies of Barthes' work.
Yeah.
He's not just giving us answers. He's giving us the tools to ask better questions,
Right.
to think more critically, and to engage with language in a more conscious and deliberate way.
So the next time we're writing an email or crafting a presentation or even just scrolling through social media, we can kind of keep Barthes' ideas in mind, asking ourselves, what are the hidden meanings at play here?
Hmm.
What are the underlying assumptions, and how is language being used to shape my perceptions and beliefs?
Exactly. And by asking those questions, we can become, more discerning consumers of information, more effective communicators,
Right.
and more engaged citizens in a world where language matters more than ever.
This has been such an incredible deep dive.
Yeah, it has.
I feel like we've only scratched the surface of Barthes' work,
Howdy, Ty.
but it's definitely given me a whole new perspective on writing and communication in general. I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way.
I hope so. And I encourage everyone to keep exploring Barthes' work, to delve deeper into his ideas, and to see how they can be applied to their own lives. It's a journey well worth taking.
And to all our listeners out there, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this deep dive into Roland Barthes. Head over to our website and share your reflections, your questions, your aha moments. And until next time, keep diving deep, keep questioning everything, and keep playing with the beautiful, messy, and endlessly fascinating world of language.